Hello, Taylor Elwood here, and welcome to the Men's Mysteries podcast. Today, I am talking with Wes Lambert about the topic of what is mature masculinity. First, Wes, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about who you are and a little bit about your Substack for people who may not know what you're doing.
Yeah. Thank you, Taylor. Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to chat with everyone. So my name's Wes. I'm a practicing psychotherapist working in private practice. I also have my own podcast, The Mature Male. It's similar work to Taylor's, and I'm based out of Boston, Massachusetts. I'm married. I have one kid and another on the way. So
Excellent. Congratulations on the kid coming up and everything else. Um, And just a note for people who join us live, if you have questions at any time, feel free to drop those below and I'll put them out there. So yeah, I'm curious, what's your definition of mature masculinity? What does it mean to be a mature man? Because that is what your Substack is titled. And as I said, I've written a book about the topic myself, so I'm always fascinated to discover what other people are thinking about what mature masculinity looks like.
yes, certainly. And I'd like to not let you off the hook and get your answer after mine. But yeah, I would say there's we could see it in in a framework of the subjective and the objective, right? So let's start with the objective. I think there is enough of a, let's say, collective consensus to agree what a mature person looks like in general. So this is just the objective, right? And these are things like treating others with kindness and respect, doing the due diligence of having responsibilities, so maintaining jobs, maintaining healthy relationships, learning how to communicate effectively, and then the basic things of like budgeting, living by a schedule, these kind of things, right? So I would say that's the objective level, right? And so if you are developing as a person, there is a certain correlation of how mature someone should be in certain signs. So an example would be a mature 12-year-old might be able to communicate that they need help in a particular subject, but we wouldn't call that maturity for a 30-year-old, because that doesn't necessarily match the correlation. You should be further along when you're 30, right? And we can get into this too. The issue is that we over correlate uh, developmental maturity with emotional cognitive maturity. So we say, oh, because this is a grown man, he's mature. But that's not actually the case. And we can get into how it's actually more accurate psychologically to engage with somebody based on their maturity level on an emotional, cognitive standpoint, let's just say mental, than developmental, and that's the case. But anyways, back to how to reframe this, right? So there's the objective, meaning we've agreed upon, hey, this is what it means to be mature as a person. These are the things you need to do. And by the way, that maturity is what we would call like a progressive curve. So it's not just a stagnant, permanent state, but more like a dynamic, ever evolving state that should perpetually be more and more defined as time goes on. Then there's the subjective. And this is where it gets interesting because this is dependent on socioeconomic status, ethnicity, where you live in the world, and some of these subcultures have now formed in society because of the internet. There are more particular definitions of what it means to be mature. So I'll give you an example, right? Um, Based on where you live in the country, let's say you are a farmer in the Midwest. The way that you're going to define maturity as a man would be duty, hard work, um, discipline, loyalty to whatever your job is, right? maybe if you are a single young person in the Northeast, you might define maturity as making a lot of money, being able to buy what you want, um, being able to seize the moment of an opportunity no matter what the cost. So I think it's really important to know that in some ways, is there a defined definition of manhood? Yes, for sure. We have to start with agreeing there's that, right? But then how we define it and how it's expressed is based on however many men there are in the world, because that's a unique expression to every man. That's what I would start with how I would define masculinity.
I like that. I think that's yeah. I think there's a lot of nuance to that. So I'll answer the question. um, when I think about mature masculinity, what I think of is a man who is in touch with his inner boy and
Mm,
is doing the work to father that inner boy. He is being the father and perhaps the mother as well that inner boy never had, or maybe didn't get. Because what I see out there is a lot of wounded men, and having been one of those wounded men myself, and having done a lot of work to get to where I'm at, and still doing some work, I think that what I see is like the difference between the immature and the mature masculine is how in touch that man is with his inner boy and the work that he has done to parent that boy and to give that boy expression, but without allowing that boy to lash out and react. Instead, he's operating from a place of responsibility, awareness that he has the ability to respond to the world around him and make choices. And that as a result, he's able to show up with a grounded presence because he's safe for himself. And as a result, other people see that he's safe to be around. The other way that I look at it in terms of mature masculinity is that mature man is a man who is in touch with every aspect of his life and he's actively taking care of every aspect of his life. Physically, he's taking care of himself. He's getting enough sleep. He's exercising regularly. He's doing some form of contemplation, prayer, meditation practice, whatever that might be. He is actively in a dialogue where he is learning how to like, love, trust, respect, and care for himself, and he's not putting it on someone else. He's not expecting someone else to take care of him. He's actively doing the work. That's important. And he's attending to the areas outside of his life. He's making sure he's got a solid relationship with money. It doesn't mean that he has to be making six figures or anything like that. It does mean he needs to be in touch with his relationship with what money is and how he responsibly stewards that. Same thing in regards to his relationship with the world around him. What is he doing to show up as a responsible citizen? What is he doing to show up in responsibility to nature and taking care of nature and being part of nature, not just trying to be over it, but being collaboratively with it? And then, of course, in relationship to other people, does he have healthy male friendships? Does he have brotherhood? Is he connecting with other men in a grounded way where he's not trying to compete with them for everything? You might have some fun competition, but not. He's not worried about like, oh, that man's is gonna beat me at the job, or he's gonna lure my woman away, or anything like that. He is just grounded, and when he's in relationship with a woman, he's showing up in a really healthy and grounded way there as well because he knows himself, he knows what he wants, he's able to advocate for it, and he doesn't expect a yes. He's honoring his sacred yes and his sacred no, and as a result, he's showing up in a very grounded way. So that's my definition of mature masculinity. It's a lot to aspire to, and I think it's a really important thing to aspire to as well.
yeah. I'm glad, I went first because that felt like it, was my preferred, way of seeing it, and I appreciate, your obvious amount of thought and consideration you've put into defining it. And let's touch on that sense of healing the inner boy. I think that's really important. You know, I haven't quite interpreted that through the lens of fathering the boy yourself. I think that's an interesting meta concept because you're both the boy and the father. This is spiritually similar. Let's say in Christianity, you have the Trinity, right? It doesn't really make sense that they're three separate but three equal. And it's kind of a similar thing where you have this hierarchy, but yet this relationship. But I think that's right. And to back that up with some pretty significant proof and data. I've interviewed some people on my show, some researchers and psychologists that show the time boys really stop being emotional, the time they stop being relational to other boys in a healthy way, and the time they stop expressing themselves without question tends to be around the age of 12 or 13. This also happens to be around the age where historically you would see rites of passage happen. So we're talking about a really critical moment going back to the importance of development where boys are shifting quite dramatically. And you may say, like, well, why this age, right? There's a few reasons. One, the hormones start kicking in, right? And all of a sudden, a girl isn't just a friend; she wants to be more than a friend, right? And now all of a sudden, okay, well, if I want to be with this girl, um, now my relationship to other boys have changed because instead of seeing it as community, they're now competition. Oh, well, they can get with them as well, right? The second thing is that this is where you start seeing boys be policed by other boys. So you'll start seeing a hierarchy of socialization going on. I don't know if this happened to you. It certainly did for me. There tended to be one or two really dominant guys that were a bit of a bully and kind of overly assertive in controlling who's in and who's out. And then you start realizing, oh, not everyone is just in it for giggles and good times. Now there's guys that are kind of separating out socially what's appropriate, what's not, right? And then the third would be the emotional shift that happens. A boy starts becoming more and more aware of what's going on emotionally. But yet the expression of that is, seen tragically. We use these phrases like that's gay, that's weak, you shouldn't do that. Which, by the way, it's 2025. These things are still being said by boys, so don't think we've come too far in that regard. And so boys actually start seeing if I'm going to be, if I want to work my way up the hierarchy, if I want to gain some sort of female approval and outdo my competition, I can't express myself as a boy. So this threshold we're talking about is a really critical point. And the reason why I bring all that up is because you mentioned healing the inner boy. Well, how do we do that? Boyhood tends to be a fair amount of years. How do you go about that? And I would say that if someone's looking to heal their inner boy, you need to go back to that particular time and try to name any painful memories or experiences or relationships that you had that, let's say, shut you off to your inner boyhood. Okay, when did you stop asking for help and expressing your emotions? When did you stop just bonding with other boys for the sake of boys? When did it start becoming a competition? Um, and these are good signs that if we now fast forward, we know set guys up for really long-term detrimental ways of thinking. And we still see this with other men, right? It's not just that we can have a good time and joke, it's gotta be at the cost of somebody. Well, you're this, you're less than, you're this, that, that's, weaker than me or less than, and so I'm gonna use that, as a way of bonding and joking. It's the same with needs. If you're ever in a group of guys, you're not gonna be the one to say you're struggling. "Oh, I need help. Can you be there for me?" That none of that's true, right? So these are very deeply internalized narratives and beliefs we have about our boyhood that we really need to address and to heal. And it seems counterintuitive, right? Well, I'm a man. What do I need to go back and deal with that shit for? That's in the past. But in actuality, a lot of progressing is feels like regressing. But it's actually readdressing what you never dealt with in a way that moves you forward and doesn't keep you back.
Yeah, I think that's a really good exploration of that. I would add a couple things to it. I mean, I think part of it, you're right. Boys definitely police other boys. I also think the father and the mother wound are important, relevant things with that. I know for myself, like I grew up in a situation where my father was like, big boys don't cry. You're not supposed to show emotions, things along those lines. And it was interesting because he was so out of control with his own emotions,
Mm,
like so reactive. And so hearing that it was kind of one of those fascinating things. And then you like depending on the number of parents you have wounds from each of them.
yeah.
I had a mom, I had a stepmom, and a dad. I had three patterns right there.
Mm,
And one thing that I find as an interesting correlation is that if I look at in my own work with men and also my own experiences, when I look at men's dating patterns, like in terms of who they end up dating, inevitably they end up dating their parents because they're trying to fix the wounds that they had with their parents in relationship with whoever it is they're in relationship with. The part of that parenting is also if I want to continue trying to date my parents, the projections of my parents, the wound that and essentially trying to heal that wound, or do I want to heal myself? Do I want to parent myself so that I can give that inner boy what he needs, so that then he can move on and I can move on, and so that when I do choose a partner for my life, I'm choosing someone that is actually it's actually based on something that's not my parents. It's
mm,
something different. It's something that I've broken that pattern. And then there's also the ancestral patterns there because our parents are shaped by our ancestors or their ancestors or our ancestors. So really, they're carrying their wounds from their parents. And if they haven't done the work to resolve them, and let's face it, a lot of parents have not, then that's also being carried on. So in a very real sense, this parenting of the self is also about healing the ancestral epigenetic wounds that are being carried. And by being able to go back and work through that and parent the little boy, we're healing, yeah, the wounds in relationship to other boys, the wounds in relationship to girls, but also the wounds in relationship to our ancestors, mother, father, grandmother, grandfather, step parents, if you happen to have them, which a lot of people do. And by doing that, we're getting really clear then on the way that we're choosing to show up in our own lives. We're choosing it from a much more aware place, conscious place, as opposed to just unconscious reactivity.
mm. Yeah, no, I think that's right. And just to speak from a psychological perspective, um, your parents are your first um, definition of love, and they're your biggest imprint of it. So I always say, whether or not it was a super messed up version of love, that's how you're going to internalize it as love. And especially for the father, for a boy, if we want to talk about admiration and idolization, look no further than a boy to his father, right? And it doesn't matter if your dad was really messed up again or not, you're going to look to him in this high regard. And so, to your point, being about that age, 12, 13, you start to really long for some guidance. You go through this developmental stage of like life is just fun. I'm chilling, I'm having a good time. Really start encountering some real problems, right? Whether that's in school, academically, or relationship wise, you start to be aware of like, man, this is, difficult. I need some support. And that inflection point of needing a father figure to really step in and help guide and teach his son is missing, to your astute point. And what happens is the boy starts internalizing, I'm in this alone. There's no one here to support me. And what's said and what your dad said is figure it out, tough it up. I'm not going to be with you in that experience. Essentially, I need you to get right or get your shit together before we enter into relationship. And then that's where the shame can be internalized because then it says, what's wrong with me that I'm not good enough to be in relationship with this person? I have to change who I am or what I'm doing. We fast forward and see how this is internalized. Oh, this is every man who's bought a Lamborghini until he's broke, right? Or brags about how much he can lift at the gym. Well, my goodness, isn't this the boy's cry to fit in and say, "Well, I've done what I've could to make sure that am within this ethos," and, yeah, I just think that's such a good point you mentioned about the need for that and the dynamic, let's say, diversity of the wound. The mother wound brings its own wound, a step-parent wound its own. I also, lost my dad when I was 11. My stepdad came into my life 3 years later. I was really hoping for someone to not necessarily replace, but certainly provide some sort of more male, engaged male presence, and I didn't get that, and that's adding to the wound, right? Of this sense of abandonment and neglect, that you have to deal with and own up to, but, what I hear you saying in that is essentially you don't come out of this thing unscathed. You do have wounds. Not everyone has severe trauma, but you certainly have had some sort of painful experience that marked how you see the world today in a negative manner. And they're worth addressing. These things don't heal on their own, they're not magic. It takes caring to something, right? Just like if you had a physical wound, you would never say, well, some guys would, which is probably the issue and very ironically symbolic, right? But oh, I'm fine. It'll be okay. And then what happens? It festers, right? It gets worse. So yeah, I'm glad you said that.
Well, it's interesting because I mean, like that phrase "I'm fine" is something that so many men learn, right? I'm fine, and they're not. Internally, they're not at all. But they're so disconnected with that experience because they've been socialized that way. And their little boy is aching to be seen and heard and understood and respected. I mean, at the heart of any wounding, that is really what's operating there on the emotional level. I want to be seen. I want to be heard. I want to be understood. I want to be respected.
Mm,
So, with that very core understanding, like giving the child that creates the opportunity for the child to grow, and as a result changes the patterns of how a man's showing up in his life, and that's where it's an initiation at that point into mature masculinity. It's the initiation. You mentioned earlier, like around like 12 or 13, right? Boys, ideally would be getting initiated. We don't really have that in the US or in Western society in general, but that's where that initiation process starts to kick in, because now I'm giving that boy the chance to be witnessed, and in the witnessing of that boy, I can start to move past that wound that is keeping me at a certain age, at least in certain ways. Because I might be physically, in my case, 48 years old, right? But if I'm operating from a 10-year-old wound, I'm 10 years old. And you know what's really scary about that? Think about it. A 10-year-old and a 48-year-old body, an adult grown body, strong, able to do things, like that's dangerous right there at that point.
mm.
That's kind of the thing that I think a lot of people don't always look at, but I think it's a really important thing to recognize. It's like when you're operating from that place of I've been wounded at 10 years old and that's the wound I'm carrying right now. Well, wow, there's that attachment wound right there. And that's where you're operating from. How are you going to respond? You might be 48 years old and you have all the power and capacity and strength of being at 48 years old, but you don't have the maturity. That's where it gets really scary.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I use that framework of developmental versus mental maturity, oftentimes with parents, right? Because you think this person, even our own parents, it's a strange concept to think this person was, uh, let's say effective enough to raise me, okay, take care of all the basics, but yet they seem to fall so short on the emotional front. But the the more clearly you can accurately engage with someone at their level of maturity, the less frustrated you will be, the more at peace you will be, and the more effective you'll be in the conversation. Now, you may say, "What you think if I talk to my parent like they're a 10-year-old that's going to be appropriate?" No, what I'm saying is it helps you let go of the perpetual disappointment that you experience in relationships in a way that helps you reframe well, based on this person's capacity, how do I engage with them? So I have this analogy. I use the exit row strategy. When you sit in the exit row on a plane, they ask you two questions: Are you willing, or are you able? You have to be willing. You have to have the desire, and you have to be able, have the capacity to engage in any dialogue or relationship with someone. So when you're engaging with someone, it's really important to name that. And I say that because, back to your point, the falsity men believe is, again, because I'm a grown man, you should respect me. That's a big thing, right? Just do this because I say this, because this is how it is. And yet, why are we not actually making them earn that respect to say, well, I'm going to engage in you on the level of maturity that you've earned? And this is really an issue in a lot of, heterosexual relationships. You see a lot of women feel dominated because their husbands, boyfriends are tyrants, or little toddlers throwing tantrums all the time, and don't feel loved and cared for. And there's this reciprocal involvement and commitment on both ends, right? And those guys shouldn't get away with that. So a lot of my work I do alongside with men, ironically, is to help women negotiate for themselves, to stand up for themselves and stop taking that shit because it's not right. And the only reason, by the way, the guy has gone that long with throwing a tantrum at 48 is because no one called him out. And going back to the rape parenting, unfortunately, that should have been his parents. But it just keeps going, and then no one's held accountable, and then here you are, right? And so, obviously, for all of us, we're on this call, and the work is really hard. The younger you are and the earlier you can do it, the more intense and costly it's going to feel, but the more benefit and long-term positive effects you're going to have if you can do that. So, I agree. I think just starting to engage with men on their level, it also strikes something in the man who's being held accountable to say, well, why is he talking to me like this? And it helps him do some reflective work to say, well, maybe I'm not uh, as mature far along as I thought, right? I mean, we know this by the research that men are chronically overconfident in their skills. Oh, I'm just amazing I'm better at this, so this is going great. I mean, you ask most men in their marriage, how's it going? Oh, yeah, it's not too bad, right? To use your words, it's fine. In actuality, he's probably chronically overlooking some pretty detrimental dynamics that are actually, one or two actions away from ruining the whole marriage. You talk to the wife, she could give you a 4-page report on everything that's wrong, right? So, this doesn't always happen based on gender. Certainly, we can't oversimplify, but I think, to your point, this is true.
Yeah, well, and I think that's a good point there. In terms of relationships, right? A lot of the struggle that men have is around being relational. How they're not relational with themselves, and so as a result, they're not relational with the women in their lives, and they're not relational with other men. What I found is that when I've gotten into healthier relationships with other men, the accountability that's been needed has been provided. And as a result, that has translated over into the relationships that I have with women because for one thing, I'm not putting all the emotional eggs in one basket. I'm not putting all the emotional burden of the relationship on the woman. And speaking as a man who's sometimes been the one doing all the emotional labor in the relationship, it goes both ways. I think that is an important thing to acknowledge and recognize. I don't think that it's said often enough that there are men who are genuinely doing the work where sometimes it's like, hey, the partner needs to be, she needs to be showing up differently. It's the heterosexual relationship. So it goes both ways for sure.
I agree with
So
that. And I think, too, real quick, I know you've mentioned in our dialogue on Substack, here's the ironic part: you get penalized for being a mature male. Women, a lot of women actually will subconsciously penalize you for doing the work. Why? Because it usually requires that immature person to step up, and they want an excuse to stay where they're at. And there's this common um, let's say, stereotype, right, that all men are immature. And so if you're actually doing the work, you're fighting an uphill battle of a lot of assumptions and judgments where women, won't give you the chance or just, will write you off. So, I agree with that. And I appreciate what you said. You have to learn to have a relationship with yourself. And this is what I would speak to with male loneliness is that there is a difference in being alone and feeling lonely. So being alone is a physical state that we all find ourselves in, some more than others. It's also personality contingent, right? Feeling lonely is an internalized state. And, myself included, your inability to be alone with yourself and have a relationship with yourself is a major cause for a lot of the problems, right? So we know, okay, we correlate the male loneliness. Oh, men aren't good at making friends. They're not good at being social in general, asking for help. All these things. The depth of their relationships aren't great. Yes, but what we're not getting at on the deepest level is we're not teaching men how to love themselves when they're by themselves. And how do you spend time alone? And not in this overly placated, like, oh, just give yourself a little massage and, lean back. It's doing things that are truly reflective of the care you see yourself as a person. But if you don't value yourself as a man, what is there to take care of? There's no value to uphold. So I'm really glad you say that because your ability to have a relationship with yourself is a direct correlation with your ability to have a relationship with others. So one way to see it is if you ever meet anyone who's antisocial or they're not necessarily easy to get along with, or let's just say that they're not good about getting real and opening up. Well, then they probably have never gotten real with themselves and opened up. They haven't allowed themselves to go to those lengths. And so this is why there's really never an excuse to always be developing and maturing appropriately because regardless of what chances you have to externalize that, meaning what relationships you have to practice in, you always have yourself, and that self is always worth tending to.
Yeah, exactly. And the relationship you have with yourself is crucial. The self-talk, the beliefs that you have around yourself. One of the most pivotal turning points for me in my own journey was when I'd gone through a breakup and I realized I was like, I can't get involved with anybody else. I need to get this figured out because
Mm,
this was a rebound relationship I'd gotten into after I'd gotten divorced. So I was like, there's a lot of unprocessed stuff around the divorce that I didn't deal with because, I didn't know. So I ended up taking a breakup course at the time, and I picked up this really good book that they recommended, which is called "Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends Upon It" by Kamal Ravikant. I started reading it, and I started a self-love practice and it's evolved a lot since then. But one of the most important things that I did is I started looking myself in the mirror, and I said, "I love you,"
mm,
and I've added to that. Then I love you, I like you, I care about you, I honor you, I respect you. And
mm,
finally, the most important one, I trust you. You might think that that's odd. Why is trust the most important one? Why not love? And here's what I found. I can love somebody but not like them, right? It's easy. I see it all the time. People love somebody. Oh, I love this person, but I don't really like them.
mm,
And if I don't like myself or I don't like somebody else, then there's the care, the respect, all that other stuff is going to be there. Most importantly, the trust. My ability to trust myself is directly correlates to my ability to show up in my life with the commitments I make. Because if I don't trust myself, then I'm not going to trust my decisions. If I don't trust my decisions, I'm not going to follow through. I'm going to
mm,
find reasons to waffle and waver and weasel out of those commitments and out of my values. So I always end it with "I trust you." Because by doing that, what I'm really doing is I'm saying, look, I trust you to show up for yourself today. You've got this. And I say this out loud each day. I say it at the beginning of the day and I say it at the end of the day, giving that little boy and the rest of me that validation that nobody else needs to give me. I don't need anyone else to give it to me. And by giving it to myself, I'm able to show up better in all the areas of my life and for all the other people who rely upon me. I think that is absolutely essential toward that quest for mature masculinity because then men know, oh, I know myself well enough to know I'm going to show up for myself. And if I can show up for myself, then I'm going to also be able to show up for the other people who need me.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I appreciate you sharing that practice. I will have to try it out and let you know how it goes. But I think it's so simple yet powerful.
Really is. It's all about that. It's all about that self that the self relationship. All of our other relationships are stem from that. It's an interesting thing. I think that one of the things that I've observed about men is that relationally, what they are taught is go outward to find what you need. And this is why a lot of men, like when they're in a relationship with a woman, that's their primary relationship to the point that it's really codependent and unhealthy. They don't have a primary relationship with themselves. That's the person they need to have the primary relationship with. Because if there's one simple truth here, it's this: the one person you're always going to be with, no matter what, is you.
Yep.
It's you.
Yep. So learn to love it.
Learn to love it, like it, care for it, respect it, honor it, and trust it. And if a man can do that, then no matter what challenges come his way, he'll be able to do the hard things. And that's the other aspect to it. It's that ability to do the hard things. Like there are going to be times where things are hard. But that ability to trust yourself will carry you through the hard things and will help you to move forward in a way that allows you to create your life on your terms.
Mm,
And that's what I think at the heart a lot of men really want. They want to know that their lives are out on their terms instead of having it be on someone else's terms, whether it's your dad, your boss, the woman you're with. And that doesn't mean that there isn't room for compromise or connection. There is. I mean, being relational with somebody necessarily requires connection, requires the willingness to, I think, show up in a way where it's like, yeah, I can take responsibility for my choices. I can take responsibility for the way I show up. But what I think a lot of times I see that most men are missing out there, if they haven't done this work, is they're missing their mission and purpose. They're missing that quest that allows them to go on and say, this is what I'm here for, and I'm creating my life this way. And I may be sharing that life with somebody. I may be sharing it, and that's great. And if I am sharing that life with someone, I'm hopefully sharing it with somebody who has shared values, has the same shared values that I have. That's the other thing that I look at in terms of mature masculinity. Because let's say I see a woman who's I'm a heterosexual man, so I'm just gonna frame it this way. I see a woman who's walking down the street, and I'm like, wow, she's hot. All right, well, that's operating from the immature place, right? Because that's basing it on her looks. I don't know who she is. I don't know what her mind is. I don't know how her emotions, her inner world, or anything like that. And if I base getting together, trying to get together with her, or getting together with her on her looks, I'm going to be in for disappointment. But if I get curious and I'm like, here's my values. I value X, X, and X. And I'm going to get together. I want to get together with this person and find out, is there a value alignment? If my values match with her values, then the chances of that relationship working out are going to be a lot better than if they don't. And I've definitely been that guy who's gotten involved with somebody who was not healthy. There wasn't the matching values. And lo and behold, the relationship didn't work out. So there's something to be said for that as well, as part of that quest for mature masculinity.
yeah. No, I agree. I appreciate you saying that. I think to have a mission and a purpose is to know who you are, but what you are made for. And I want to be clear that your mission and purpose is unique to you and how you express it, but it's not unique to you in that you have it. Every single person has it. And that may not be mainly expressed in your job. And this is a big thing, I think especially millennials and younger struggle with of, oh well, if I am not working a job that has a lot of meaning, what the hell's the point, right? It's not, it's all meaningless. But you realize if you're aware as a man, you play so many different roles, you know? I mean, first you're a son, that's just from the birth, right? Then if you have siblings, you're a brother or a friend, you're a brother in that regard. And then you find long-term partnership, you're a husband, and then you have kids, you're a father, right? There's all these different roles. And it's important to ask, what is the meaning and purpose I have in each of these things? And if I was to see where I'm going in 5 years, what would that look like? Now, the chances of it looking like what you project are pretty slim, but that's actually not the point. The point is that you would have something to aim towards, to work towards, because men need, especially men, also all humans, but particularly the male species needs to feel dignified and admired for what they have done, right? Yeah. Deep down, this is a falsity where most men don't want to be challenged. They don't want to rise to the occasion. No, actually, most guys don't want to get let off the hook. They just have to find something meaningful to be accountable to. And your ability as a man to create a clear vision, say, what kind of husband, what kind of father, what kind of brother, what kind of son do I want to be, to aim towards that and work towards it, it's dignifying. It gives you something beyond just your job or, let's say, any external expression to, and gives you a reason to get up every day, right? Because work may or may not, be connected. You may or not be in a relationship, but your worth and your value and aiming towards that meaning is not contingent on the external outcomes of it, right? And then to add one last thing on, the other thing is uh, every woman is looking for a man to step up and be clear and decisive and confident what you think. Now, they're not going to always agree, as they shouldn't, right? And it doesn't mean just because you have some sort of vision or the ability to make the decision that that's automatically accepted as right. And in fact, you won't know what's right until you risk, until you try, until you get feedback. This is the power of relationships. If you don't have a mirror in your life, someone that's constantly telling you yes, no, appropriate, not true, within a healthy way, right? Then how else do you know you're growing? You're just stuck with your own self assessment, which is, a really poor, unclear way of knowing who you are and where you're at and maturing. So I'll just say, like, even if it's not just for your sake, know that if you're getting into a relationship with a woman, many women are just begging a guy, having opinions. This whole like, do whatever you want, dear, is just, it does not fly. It does not work. You need to be confident. That way you can learn and be refined on how to, be more effective in expressing that mission and purpose. But also it's going to help you relationally because you got to do the work. It's not your woman's, responsibility to put the onus on that. I mean, we all want to feel cared for, right? And considered. And the way that we do that is by taking the ownership and being proactive first.
Yeah. Well, we're getting to the time here to wrap up, and I want to honor your schedule here as well. So, Wes, thank you for coming on the show. Can you tell us where we can find you on the web, and leave us with one final word of wisdom that we can carry forward with us for the day?
Yes. All right. Yeah, so people can find me on YouTube or Spotify. Just type in the mature male. My channel will pop up. And then on Substack as well, also called the mature male. The newsletter is a little bit more for my personal reflections, and the YouTube and Spotify are more guests that I have that speak to the male experience and different life lessons to have. So that's where you can find me. I also do personal coaching and therapy work for anyone who would be interested in that. And you can reach out to me, on Substack for that. Um, as far as a piece of wisdom, I would say you want to start with knowing yourself. So I would recommend taking a personality test. My recommendation would be the Big Five. That's just one of many, but I would start there. I would start with your upbringing, understanding your conditioning. How were you raised? What were the messages you received as a kid about what it meant to be a man, but just in particular, different things. If you have any trauma, obviously start to address that and heal from that. And once you have that baseline of identity and understanding, I would say the second level, and you spoke to this earlier, I really appreciate it, is the values. I'd throw two more V's in there, the virtues and vices. So values, what you care about. The top 5 values are the things that are most motivating what you do as a person. Really important to know that in general, but also finding a life partner to see. We know statistically you need 1 to 2 of those values to match to have a good shot at sharing a balanced life. Virtues, what are the, life-giving, affirmative ways of living you need to embody? So, honesty, integrity, discipline, vulnerability, these are things you wanna aim towards, and then vices, lying, greed, hedonism, those things you wanna avoid, right? Those are the 3. And the last thing I'll leave you with is then figuring out, we talked about this earlier, but having some sort of vision. So where are you headed? Who's the kind of person you wanna be in your career, in your relationships, with yourself, you know? What are your goals financially, health-wise, relationally, and job-wise? And put together an actual plan that you can actually hold yourself accountable to, and then go out in the world and be a man, uh, and find out what is true, what is not true. Get your hands dirty, get your heart messy, get hurt, take chances, take risks, um, and don't live this shell of a life that's just scared to try and be himself, because the self you are has a space in the world that no one can replace. So take it up.
Perfect. Well, that's a great note to end on. Thank you for coming on the show. And for the rest of you out there, take that with you and use it to create your path to mature masculinity.
All right. Thanks for having me, Taylor. Good to chat, everyone.